I'm delighted to welcome you this evening to the Cinema of Ideas, which is the Independent Cinemas Office's virtual screen. It's a space for collaboration, discussion and film. My name is Duncan Carson. I'm the Projects and Business Manager at the Independent Cinema Office. For those of you who need a visual description, I'm a white man in his 30s with a beard and glasses, wearing a grey jumper against a cream background. So in case some of you don't know about the work we do at the Independent Cinema Office, we're the UK's national body in support of independent cinemas of all kinds, and that includes self-starters, curators, and community screens. And we do activities including directly programming 30 cinemas, training and events, and we also have free advice if you are someone who thinks I would like to put on an event like this or on a cinema. We have great free advice about that, so bear that in mind and from our website. And I'd like to offer a really special warm welcome to audiences from our partner cinemas across the UK and audiences from all of our ICO networks. Thank you to especially also to our funder for the Cinema of Ideas, which is the British Film Institute, awarding funds from the National Lottery. So a few housekeeping things to mention before we get started and we can get into the fun. Just to let you know, this event is being live captioned, and thank you to Susan for being our captioner this evening. And also the event is being recorded, so if you enjoy what you hear tonight and you think, I wish my friend heard that, they really get a kick out of it, it will be available to view on the ICO's YouTube channel very soon, along with all of our previous Cinema of Ideas discussions. So some really amazing work on there. Really building up a great repository, so go and check it out. And I'd also like to thank my colleague Sammy, who's running the tech tonight. Just to let you know about how we're going to go this evening, it's going to be Louise's lecture is going to be about 30 minutes long, with time left at the end for some comments and questions. So get thinking about those. Do post some questions in the live stream chat, we'll probably aim to finish around 8:15 pretty promptly. And just to let you know about our next Cinema of Ideas event, I'm really glad to have a very special new commissioned film by Sarah Wood, who's, if you don't know, is one of I think one of the UK's best archival filmmakers, someone whose work is really rich in the spirit of the archive and the experience of being deprived of cinemas over the last 2 years. Drove Sarah to make this amazing new short film, Projectionism, which I think, we at this Independent Cinema Office were really grateful to see an amazing piece of work that's really kind of got to the heart of why we miss cinemas and why cinemas matter. So that will be coming to Cinema of Ideas platform on the 7th of April. Just go to the Cinema of Ideas website and you'll be able to book very, very soon. So on to tonight's amazing event, which is part of a much wider program, which I hope you're checking out. I'm really grateful to welcome Louise Milsom, the curator of this season, Visibly Animated. Louise was picked as one of the Cinema of Ideas emerging curators because we wanted to build a platform to give new curators a chance to shine, really, and Louise absolutely done that. And one of the things we wanted to do with bringing in emerging curators was give light to areas of thinking outside of the expertise of the ICO team. And Louise, as you'll soon discover, more than fulfills that brief. I have learned a lot from working with her, as well as, having produced a fantastic program, and some real expert thinking in the mix with the film selection and with the material that the whole program that she's put together. I hope you get a chance to check out the films, which are available on the 6th of April. But with no further ado, it's been a pleasure to work on this program, and just say I'm happy to hand over to Louise now.
Hello, thank you for having me. So, hello everybody. My name is Louise Milsom. I am the curator here at Visibly Animated, and I also am a part-time PhD student. So I research a representation of physical disability in animation. And this kind of whole season has come about of me kind of thinking, I've never seen a whole group of animated shorts put together, but focusing on disabled people and telling people stories. And that's just really what I wanted to kind of showcase here in the season. So without further ado, my presentation. Next. So you notice here, this is going to be a very kind of brief look into representation of disability in animation, because I've researched a lot and I can't really cover it all. And I also, as I said, my personal focus is on physical disability because I myself have cerebral palsy. And although I also rely on subtitles as I have auditory processing disorder, but that's kind of what I'm looking into here today. So what I wanted to start to look at was disability in the early film anime industry. By that I mean kind of the silent films. So kind of the beginning of disability in the film industry began with shock horror films such as the automobile accident in 1904, and what that kind of entailed was someone who was had amputated legs. They and another person who had legs would kind of swap. So you'd have someone with legs be run over by a car, and then it would switch to someone who didn't have any legs, and the shock is, oh, they've been run over and they haven't got any legs. So it's kind of various shock and comedy value. And another early comedy genre involved the faking of disability, because in early USA, it was kind of a social problem. They had people who were faking being blind or faking missing limbs to try and ask people for money on the streets. An example of that is the fake beggar. There's another group of films kind of revolving around people who had disabilities, usually visual problems, going out on adventures and causing problems to everyone else by getting into situations that endangered the lives of themselves, so everyone else. And this is scholar Martin F. Norden typed this. He has a list of like disability archetypes and tropes, and one of them is the comic misadventure, which this kind of genre falls neatly under, and also a group of animated shorts titled Mr. Magoo, who was a visually impaired person who would also get into trouble, and we'll talk about him more in detail later on. But the main idea here is that disability in early film was always kind of used for either comedy purposes, shock, or sentimentality. And next slide. So within the early animation industry, I've been looking at physical labor in animation industry. There's been a lot of discourse lately about how accessible the animation industry really is, and I kind of wanted to go back to the very beginning and see exactly where this kind of these problems and attitudes came from. So at the beginning of the 1910s, people named Taylor and Gilbreth they published literature on the principles of scientific management by Taylor and Gilbert's motion studies. And the whole idea of this was revolutionizing industries with time and labor-saving methods by the use of specialized tasks and assembly line production. And John Randolph Bray was the first to organize an assembly line process to mass produce animation. So you'd have people doing different jobs, either ink painting or keyframe animation, and it would just kind of pass from one department to the other. And this kind of falls underneath a attitude during the early part of the 20th century of streamlining industries, making them efficient with no deficiencies, hygienic. Attitudes around hygiene were also very prevalent during this time because of medical breakthroughs, and everything had to be clean. And it's also unfortunately part of 1930s eugenic culture. which also kind of stems from this time. And what I find interesting is Western definitions of disability often stem from a value placed on independent autonomy and industrial wage labor practices. Disability seems to be classed as any condition that interferes with these values. So, for example, something like epilepsy or physical conditions would count as this, but something like infertility wouldn't count as a disability generally in Western culture because it doesn't interfere with wage labor practices and bodily autonomy. And next slide, please. So when I was kind of researching the early animation industry, I came across the original patents submitted by Bray and another early animator Heard for cell animation, which is obviously the use of celluloid as opposed to paper, which how it was originally. And the whole idea of cell was to make things kind of easier to trace rather than redrawing on paper time and time again. These patents were submitted between January 1914 and March 1926. And they kind of, in the patents, the language used emphasizes the desire for rapid and inexpensive production of a large number of successive pictures showing on an object which will seemingly move about from place to place and assume various expressions and positions in a natural and characteristic manner, emphasis mine. The use of transparent material also ensures maintenance of proper proportions and allows for, again, natural and realistic movement, while the use of thin tracing paper, being very flexible, can be held together along one edge and rapidly turned and moved together to determine whether or not the movement of the object will appear smooth and natural or awkward and jerky. So this just kind of got me thinking. So the ideal for animation and movement in animation always seems to be smooth and natural and not awkward and jerky. And I was thinking, so is awkward or jerky movement in animation inherently bad? Because for a medium that sometimes tries to make itself as realistic as possible, I myself have awkward and jerky movement during my cerebral palsy. So is that seen as not ideal movement? And it just kind of got me thinking. So continuous fluid movement is considered to be of central importance to animated aesthetics, and that's kind of been taken and honed especially by the big monolith of them all, Disney Animation Studios. And next slide, please. So Disney and disability. When I think Disney disability, the first character that came to mind was Captain Hook. He can be categorized under another of Martin F. Norden's disability archetypes, the obsessive avenger, that being someone who has been disabled and is now out for revenge against who they perceive to have caused that disability. There's also the Seven Dwarfs, who, as you may recall recently, the remake was criticized by Peter Dinklage, who himself has dwarfism, and called it a backward story because the dwarfs are somewhat infantilized and servile to Snow White, the able-bodied protagonist. I put Pinocchio on here because when viewing the film, thought, well, his movement is very stiff because of his wooden joints. And I was thinking, he may not be classed as disabled, but I see him as kind of an example of disabled movement. And another terrible example I found in the 1930s is the Pied Piper of Hamelin, as you know, based on the fairy tale. And when researching this animated short by Disney, I found a review, which you may see on the side of your screen, that while reviewing the film, says that the old nursery favorite in which bands of children misunderstood at home dance away into the land of unending joy, taking with them the little lame boy miraculously made whole again. So this is another example of disability trope known as the miracle cure, which I think stems from the medical model of disability, which was popular during this time, which was very much focusing on medical symptoms of disability and overcoming disability. And focusing on a cure. And this animated short, adapted from Pied Piper, ends with all the young children dancing in this like utopia while the lyrics sing of Joyland where everything is great. And a young boy on crutches comes up behind them, and as soon as he reaches the mouth of this Joyland, he is able to just abandon his crutches and run off happily, miraculously cured. And to add insult to injury, the Pied Piper just throws away the crutches at the end because they obviously aren't needed anymore because he's cured. And this is a trope that's been very popular in cinema, I think, stemming from this time of some magical, not really well explained plot device just magically curing disability because it's inherently seen as a bad thing. And next slide, please. So just to kind of build on the Disney Animation Studios environment, it was, as I said, I think part of the attitude towards disability from this time from Disney Animation Studios stems from the fact that the work environment itself was presented as a utopia filled with pretty young women. Walt Disney was kind of very open about the animation practices at Disney, but it was a very curated, idealized version. So he kind of always presented these young, clean, able-bodied women showing how great the it was working at the studio, which was not always the case. And in fact, overwork and not very good pay led to the first Disney studio strike in 1941 for better pay and working conditions. And Disney blamed communism for the strikes. He was very anti-communism, and he valued those who worked harder and more productively above all else, saying they would be paid the harder they worked, which is obviously a symptom of capitalism, but I think also part of why it's been so hard for disabled animators to work in this industry, because this attitude that stems from back in of working hard and, you know, working for less pay and working overnight and often in very cramped, dark conditions. Next page, please. So I've talked a lot about Disney and kind of it's always been seen as the studio talking about fairy tales and classic literature. So obviously some ableist stereotypes may be stemming from adaptation of those original sources. But I also found some examples of disabled representation in the the UPA studios and Warner Brothers. Now, obviously, they're more focused on comedy, but I found Mr. McGoo, who I mentioned earlier, as being a visually impaired person who often gets into trouble and scrapes and is seen as kind of a bother to those around him who have to save him and sometimes end up in precarious situations themselves. And there's also Jelma Boing Boing, who is a young boy who speaks only in sound effects. So this kind of affects negatively his family, most of all his father, who is determined to try and cure the boy because he sees it as a disadvantage. And he's also bullied at school for it. And in the end, he's not cured for it, but he manages to find a job working in radio as a kind of Foley artist. So in the end, he's not cured of it, but he finds a way to, you know, make it work for him and finds a job that he loves because of his disability, not despite of it. And I also very briefly found a Bugs Bunny in a wheelchair as a reference to Lionel Barrymore, who you may know as the actor who plays Mr. Potter. The antagonist, Mr. Potter in Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. So Lionel Barrymore is part of the Barrymore family, which is a very well-known acting dynasty. Ended up as a wheelchair user later in his life and still took on acting roles in his wheelchair. So Bugs Bunny in here is kind of referencing that. It's kind of showing the wheelchair becomes a prop as this kind of comedy gag, which isn't unusual for Bugs Bunny because he also uses a cane occasionally as kind of like an old and infirm gag when he ages up. So I think there's some good. So the UPA, I think, Mr. Magoo, you have some negative connotations there because he's seen as having to be saved. But I think John Boyne Boyne is a great early example of this disabled representation. Whereas, as I said, Warner Brothers isn't really representation isn't as much as it is using mobility aids as a comedy prop. But also got really thinking about how animation is a kind of caricature. Everything's over exaggerated. So it's kind of interesting to think about if animation, especially in comedy genres, is over exaggerated, how would that work with a physical disability? How is that kind of over exaggerated? Is that not then a necessary for jerky, unnatural movement? Next slide, please. And also, I was thinking a kind of these early books, The Illusion of Life by Disney animators, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, and The Animators Survival Kit by Rich Williams, who was the animation director for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I was just thinking, they're always described as the holy grails of character animation. But Richard Williams' book was recently criticized for having very stereotypical gender essentialism, kind of describing very feminine walks and masculine walks. And it also got me thinking, well, what kind of movement again are these books describing? It's a very privileged, able-bodied movement, and should we not get some new voices in here to kind of talk about other types of movement? And also I was also thinking of like the use of reference footage early on, especially in Disney. It was encouraged for the animators to record themselves and their movements so they know what they were animating. And if this industry is extremely hard for disabled animators, then again, does that mean that able-bodied movement or viewpoint is always going to be privileged? Next slide, please. Okay, so then we move on to the 1990s. Again, I was thinking, because it's kind of a theme here, Disney staff during what's called the Disney Renaissance, which is their string of very successful films from Little Mermaid in 89 to Tarzan in 99. During this time, they complained of physical problems such as carpal tunnel syndrome and working long hours, often staying overnight. They were quoted as saying the animation marathon was really beginning to tell on the physical strength. So I'm just seeing like over these 100 years that not much is really changing. Again, physical strength is valued, working long hours is valued, and working very hard. And if it was hard on these animators, what about those who didn't have that kind of physical strength? So in 1995, the UK passed the Disability Discrimination Act, which if you watched Then Barbara Met Alan on BBC Two the other week, they talked briefly about. It was just kind of legislation that recognized that disabled people were being discriminated against, although it wasn't really good for much else, honestly, because it was still a long fight for civil rights. And this also comes after the General Assembly claimed 1983 to 1992 the United Nations Decade of Disabled Persons, and proclaiming 1981 to be the Year of Disabled Persons. So I think it's kind of from this point onwards, we see more of a recognition towards disabled people and their fight, and also moving from the medical model of disability to the social model of disability, which is a move from focusing on symptoms to maybe it's not the medical symptoms that are disabling us, maybe it's society itself and lack of access and civil rights. And I've kind of got, from this point, we have Hunchback, which was released in 96. There was a big backlash against this film from the disabled community. Paul Spundick, who was a San Franciscan with Kipfo's scoliosis, organized a letter writing campaign to protest Disney's decision to adapt this film, and specifically asked them to change the film's title because Hunchback was a very outdated offensive term at that point. And Disney spokesman Howard Green replied, absolutely not, because we will do something that is very sensitive to the concerns of handicapped people or the physically challenged, or whatever the correct term is these days. I would also like to know that the film title was actually changed in Japan. So this was not like a worldwide issue of being stuck to the original title. This could have been changed. Particularly troubling was a British film industry report that showed that after the film was made, the term hunchback, which had largely fallen out of use in the United Kingdom, had made an unwelcome comeback in the 6 months following its release. People with scoliosis or scoliosis were now having that term flung at them again. And worse still, the UK witnessed an upsurge in physical attacks on people with disabilities. The British Scoliosis Society complained to Nicholas Scott, the Minister of Disabled People, that people with scoliosis had been targets of more than 100 assaults in the months following the release of the Disney film, whereas none had occurred in the 6 months prior. Next slide, please. So our main creature discomforts, let's bring it closer to home, shall we? Or my home, I'm from Bristol. Creature Discomforts was a series of ads inspired by the original Creature Comforts, which was a animated short which won Aardman the Oscar for Best Animated Short in 1989. It was a partnership with Leonard Cheshire Disability, challenging negative assumptions about disability. So they recorded conversations with disabled people, and then they animated them. As you see here, an example on the screen is of a tortoise with crutches who is missing his right leg. And there's also a slug who uses a electric wheelchair, and a stick insect who uses a stick as a cane. And they kind of talk about how they're perceived by society. You know, they're often left helpless because there's no disabled access, and they themselves are often treated as one person says in the series of shorts, as if there's nothing up here, referring to their mind. Sorry. So I just thought this was a series of ads that was released between 2007 and 2008, and I just think this is a great example of disabled people kind of beginning to tell their own stories with the use of an animation studio, as opposed to Hunchback of Notre Dame, which utterly refused the offer of a disabled consultant on the film. Next slide, please. So from the 2000s onwards to 2010s, I began to notice more representation in children's media. One of the things that kind of inspired my project in the first place was Peppa Pig, which, as I'm sure many are aware, the young people are very much into these days. And one episode introduces a new character called Mandy Mouse, and the play group in Peppa Pig is on top of a very high, steep hill. And as Mandy, who uses a wheelchair, is trying to push herself up the hill, Peppa asks her, "Can I push you?" Now, Dr. Amy Kavanagh, who did a talk on audio description elsewhere in the season, began a hashtag, "Just Ask, Don't Grab," on Twitter. And this kind of got me thinking of that, because it's the first kind of example I'd seen, at least in children's animation, of someone actually asking if they can help someone who is disabled and may need help. Mandy at first is like, "Nope, I got this, I'm fine," because she does more physical pursuits such as play basketball, and she seems to be very, self-sufficient in her manual wheelchair. But then as she tries to get up the hill, it is very hard, and she says, "Yes, you can help me," and only then does Peppa help her, which I think is a great example of representation for young children, and indeed for adults. A lot of people can learn from this example. Going back to Disney Pixar, the recent film Luca features a person who was born without his right arm, and when the young children asks him about it, he says, "Oh, it was eaten by a shark," and then he's like, "No, I came into this world like this," which is a great example. The directors talked about they wanted to bring that representation that was true to the time and place being post-war Italy. And the original idea was that Massimo was originally would have lost his arm during the war, and then they went to the disability rights activist and filmmaker Jim Lebret, who is the director of the documentary Trip Camp, which you may have watched last year. And when they kind of brought him on board as a consultant, they kind of adapted the idea to be someone who, instead of being disabled later in life, was actually born with that disability. Lebek said, let's get beyond these tragic stories, these old tropes, where someone with a disability is only in a story if it's centered around their disability. And let's do what we've done with other marginalized communities over the years and simply say, look, we are part of the fabric of society. I also wanted to briefly talk about the Pixar Spark Shorts online platform. Spark Shorts was an initiative by Pixar that they would give some of their employees a limited team and funds to work on a short story that was personal to them. Some of the short films that are featured include Out, which is the story of a gay man, and also Loop, which is about a non-verbal autistic girl. And what I found really great about that is that they actually cast a non-verbal autistic girl in that role, which is really honestly quite rare for voice actors in the animation industry. So I thought that was maybe the start of something, maybe that we can start to give the marginalized stories a platform, although I do wish it wasn't on Disney Plus, which is behind a paywall, but maybe it's the start of something. There's also a new show called Team Zenka Go, which features a voice actor who's also a wheelchair user, voicing a wheelchair user in the show, which again is a rare occurrence, but something I think should be highlighted and celebrated. The show is produced by DreamWorks and is on Netflix, aimed at younger children, but I think another great example of representation. Next slide, please. So moving beyond kind of Western animation, I'm quite interested in Japanese animation as well, anime. And I would like to highlight these kind of 3 recent examples. A Silent Voice is about a deaf girl, and there's a lot of use of sign language in the film, often without subtitles. And there's been some criticism of the story because the main character is a boy who bullied this deaf girl when they were younger, and now he's going to come back wanting to be friends and make amends. But what I kind of wanted to highlight again was the English dub version, which went out of its way to cast Alexa Coden, who is a deaf voice actress. And usually the way that process works is you have to listen out for beeps to cue you in on when you can talk. And they adapted that into a light system to make it, accessible for the deaf actress, which I thought was something great to do. And there's also Josie, the Tiger and the Fish, which is focused on a girl who uses a wheelchair. And at the Scotland Loves Anime Festival in 2020, which was online due to the pandemic, the filmmakers, the producer and the director talked about how it's technically difficult to animate a wheelchair because it's difficult to draw, which is what he suggests. The director, Koto Tamara, suggested maybe that's why there's so few wheelchair users in animation or anime, because it's so technically difficult to animate. And so the design boards, they often had Josie who uses the wheelchair standing up because they wanted to kind of show it would be easy for animators to animate if they can see the design of their clothes, and so it's easy for them to see that when she's standing up. And the director also went out in a wheelchair to experience the viewpoint of a wheelchair user rather than ask for try and find a disabled consultant for the film. But he kind of said about how they showed the struggles they face. And they also do animate part of the film from the viewpoint of this wheelchair user, but said that if he'd done the whole film like that, it just wouldn't have been a series of unusual angles. So they only just kept that for certain parts of the film. And when they were talking about promoting the film, they were like, it's not really, yes, this person has a disability and her legs don't work, but what doesn't really work is her heart. You shouldn't come see this film because it's a disability film. you should be able to empathize styles with the characters and shrug off your preconceptions. So make what you will of that. And also very quickly, I wanted to talk about a show that's just finished airing, Ranking of Kings, which features a deaf protagonist who uses sign language, and a hard of hearing animator actually wrote on Twitter about how happy she was to be able to animate some, I think, 2 or 3 frames of a character using sign language in the show. Next slide, please. Okay, so a very brief note on the Uncanny Valley, which was a essay by by Maury in 1970, and the whole idea of this is how the closer to realism something gets, trying to emulate humans, the more some people feel like there's something off about it. So an example of animation of this, I think that gets talked about a lot, is an early Pixar short Tin Toy, The Baby, which was one of Pixar's first attempt at animating humans. Feels off to some people, maybe because of the shyness of the skin or how very wrinkly the face is. But when writing the essay, it was Maury wrote that a prosthetic hand, because it makes movements, it could make healthy people feel uneasy. If someone wearing the hand in a dark place shook a woman's hand, the woman would most assuredly shriek. So I think what from this, what I think is an issue is there's a talk about our disconnect between images seen and the expectations of how they should appear. Carl McDormand, who worked on the 2012 translation of Maury's work, kind of highlighted some ideas of why he thought humans were sensitive to flaws in human-like forms. And one of them, again, comes back to jerky movement. That being used as an example as to why some feel that something, or they're trying to emulate being human, not quite human. And that again got me thinking, well, what about jerky movement is seen as so not ideal, not human, to kind of paraphrase that. But I think this is something we should think about, obviously, with the rise of computer animation, just something to think about. And if we move on to the next slide, I wanted to highlight Motion Disabled, which is a art installation by Selma McCowan, who directed Author Claire, available now on the Visibly Animated season. And he kind of used motion capture to highlight the movement of disabled people, those with cerebral palsy or spina bifida, or brittle bone disease, just kind of having their actions captured. And in 2012, this installation was adapted to show also motion capture the movements of Paralympians for the 2012 Paralympics. I just think it's a great kind of counterpoint to what I was just talking about, the uncanny valley and what doesn't feel quite human because of jerky or not ideal smooth movement. I hope to see more of this in the future, quite honestly. So I'm kind of speeding through this from where I'm kind of running out of time a little bit. Next slide, please. So disabled animation festivals. The first celebration of animation at festivals supposedly began at Cannes in 1946, sorry, not 56, the first International Animation Days. From this kind of stemmed the beginning of the Annecy, which is arguably the most famous animation festival in 1960, and the first disability-related film festival, Superfest in Los Angeles in 1970. So the idea of festivals is that they're social collective, they're useful for networking, a space for identity politics. One issue with that is obviously disability covers multiple identities, from the physical to the mental disabilities to deaf culture to neurodivergent. Obviously here I'm focusing on physical because I don't want to cover all that, I'm just one person. It's something to think about when lumping everything under one disabled identity. Disability themed festivals also allowed for a kind of crucial alternative approach to viewing disability. Many are a kind of introduction to disability, but some filmmakers and animators dislike the documentary approach, and I tried to include films that didn't involve solely around disability in this season. What's also interesting to consider is that kind of moving towards the alternate physical space of a festival. Often it's quite a short, intense burst of multiple screenings in a physical space that's not always accessible to those with disabilities, and access materials such as subtitles and audio description are not always available. So I think kind of that's been useful with the move to online festivals or hybrid festivals. But, you know, there are some technical issues. I think it's made it easier to access those kind of access materials. And it's interesting to note that there are several reasons for the proliferation of animation festivals, but one of them is kind of that a lot of animators are showcasing their work online now, because especially with short or experimental animation, there's not much of a platform for that, because animation shorts, which used to be screened before feature films in cinemas decades ago, that's not really a thing now. They're now mostly shown either on online platforms or specialized festivals. So I think it's kind of a kind of overlap. They really that, you know, online, the internet has made things easier for disability and animation festivals. I think that's kind of where this season is trying to find the overlap. There's a new focus on creator-driven animation as well in the 1990s, which again I think overlaps with you know, more recognition for disability rights and the campaigning for representation in film and animation. It's supported by the growth of festivals and traveling animation showcases. Although it is generally difficult to finance production of animated shorts. And I think in the Q&A with Jemima Hughes, she's well talked about how difficult it is to finance, you know, animated shorts, especially from those who can't work with bigger studios because of tight deadlines, and as I've said before, how strenuous the work is. I think also there's a political element to it, because by and large, film festivals, especially those around identity politics, are by and large sites of leftist or liberal practices, because they kind of tend to challenge myths that are often reproduced by more conservative conservative spaces and institutions. Yeah, and I've also noticed that kind of disabled animators animations often form a separate branch of animation festivals. Some of the shorts that I've curated, especially those by Jemima Hughes and Stitch by Siobhan Smith, came from the body strand of the Cardiff Animation Festival, and another animation short festival, Encounters in Bristol, also curated a kind of showcase of deaf animators a few years ago. Although I would note that this year, Jemima's new film, Unbound, is in a section called Human Nature, which explores our kind of relationship with the world around us. And that's, you know, not been labeled as disabled. It's just part there with these other animations. Next slide, please. So Visible and Visuals, which is a new organization pushing to make the animation and visual effects industries more inclusive, and Screen Skills, who are also kind of investing in an accessible and inclusive industry around film, television, visual effects, animation, and games. Those two organizations, along with the Manchester Animation Festival, really put together a survey, and they kind of sent it out to those in the animation industry, and the questions kind of revolved around, you know, how accessible they found the animation industry, how open they were about the disability, how they found the recruitment process, and if they ever encountered any discrimination. And as you can see on this screen, the majority of disabled people who replied to this survey they thought it was a good place to work in, but there could be some improvements, particularly around, as I said, the recruitment process. Sorry. And also kind of training and trying to educate staffs on topics of accessibility and inclusion. I'd just like to leave that screen there where I talk about kind of, there have been recent issues, especially in America at the moment, about overwork, crunch time, underpay, and access issues. There's a hashtag going around, hashtag New Deal for Animation on Twitter. They've been holding rally. It's kind of, the whole idea is how with animation on platforms such as Netflix, these animators who worked on these shows are not getting paid residuals on the new media. And but also, as I said, issues of deadlines, which are harder for disabled people to meet if they have issues with their physical bodies that they have to attend to first. Anyway, for these rallies for the New Deal for Animation, there are actually ASL interpreters included during speeches, which I think is just kind of a nod to how we're getting there. There are more disabled animators than there were, say, 100 years ago, when I showed you at the beginning of this presentation kind of how the animation industry was focused on assembly line processes and very mechanical work, but not much has really changed, I think, over these 100 years. Although we are getting more recognition, more disabled representation, it's kind of hinged on consultants being brought in, not always at the beginning of projects, often in the middle or near the end. And I think there's kind of that needs to be addressed. But I will leave that presentation there because I think I've massively overrun. Thank you for listening. I know I rambled on quite a bit there.
That was great, Louise. Thanks very much. So this is a portion when we're asking you to drop some more questions in the chat. So yeah, please do jump in. I guess one of the questions that's coming from the audience already is that, do you think independent cinemas could be encouraged to show more shorts before feature films, including disability related shorts?
I would love to see a return to that. As I said, cinemas used to be one short film and often a newsreel before feature films. And I think that, we could return to that, especially in the independent cinemas, which are trying to give new voices to marginalized communities. And also, I just think, well, I know it could, sorry. It could also raise issues of access materials in cinemas, such as audio description and subtitles. If they at least include them for that one short film, although it would be ideal to do it for the main feature as well, would that be something that the audience is then forced to consider, like how accessible is this for disabled audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just want to take a moment to shout out to the Garden Cinema in Covent Garden in London, who've started showing short films before their features. And in fact, they're one of the I've yet to see it, but they've kicked off this policy with in fact a short about two disabled people falling in love called Single, which is showing in front of the worst person in the world. So straight out the gate, they're getting in there with this opportunity. Got another question from the audience. So it says, great talk. Couldn't agree more myself. A lot of mainstream depictions of disability in animation seem to be in children's media. Is there much out there in adult animations other than anime?
Well, the first thing I'd say is although I'm doing a PhD in this topic, obviously the animation is a very vast medium that covers a lot of different genres. So if there's something out there that I've missed, I would love to hear about it. I'm always up for learning about, things that I haven't missed. The issue I've had is I've been trying to look at early animation, and I was trying to find these examples. And like I said, the most I could find were comedy gags where mobility aids are a prop or based on fairy tales and classic literature, which reinforces ableist stereotypes. So it's kind of only in the 80s, 90s onwards, I think, with the fight for more representation, disabled representation in this media, that these kind of that kind of these kind of stories have shown up. I'm trying to think. The first thing that came to my mind was Family Guy and South Park, which I did debate talking about. That covers issues of satire, and I think it's the creators of South Park had said they are equal opportunity offenders. So that brings up issues, as I said, of satire and the carnivalesque, which is a term which means kind of overturning an established institution, often very conservative. And so you got that, but I'm not a big fan of South Park and Family Guy, which is why I didn't decide to talk about it. But that's outside of its representation of disability. It's just not my kind of humor. But I'm trying to think, and now that question is put to me, it is mostly that I found there's also the issue of animation being seen as mostly for children. You may have seen some law over the Oscars the other night, which actually made a joke in the animation category about animation films being something for kids to sit through again and again and again, and parents to suffer through again and again. So there's also that kind of unfortunate connotation that animation is only for kids, which I think is why I've turned up more examples in children's media. But if there are some more adult animation examples, yeah, I'm keen to go out there and try and find them.
All right, that's your invitation. Anyone who's listening in who feels that there's omissions, please let Louise know. So one more question. Caption screenings in cinemas seem to be becoming more common. Very grateful for that. But there still seems to be a belief that hearing audiences don't want to watch films with captions. Would you like to see cinemas run more caption screenings or try to challenge this attitude?
Yeah, definitely, especially because this might be a really unfortunate comparison, but I was thinking, especially for independent cinemas who show a lot of international films, you have the subtitles there for a different language, and I was just thinking, it'd be useful to kind of get audiences more used to that. I myself am quite reliant on captions as well, because as I said, I have auditory processing disorder, so it wasn't until university I learned that Makaton, the sign language that's sometimes used, is not called Macintosh, which I called it for years, or when my friend was telling me about her adenoid problem, which I unfortunately misheard as hemorrhoids. I think things like that. I think, especially in cinemas as well, often this might just be the cinemas that I inhabit, but it's easy to miss nuances, I think, especially with I'm just off the top of my head. I was remembering that there were a couple of films, a cycle of films a couple of years ago that were kind of criticized for being mumbly. They were more natural, but a lot of people complained they couldn't hear what was being said because the acting, though more natural, was very mumbled and hard to hear. And I was thinking, well, it's not just for people who can't, the hard of hearing and deaf. There are people, who are hearing people who also may miss something because just natural, it happens every day. You mishear someone. So I'm just thinking, if there's something that you miss, the kind of nuance when someone's talking in a film. That's why I'm thinking maybe, subtitles could benefit everyone. But also, if it is mainly to benefit the hard of hearing and deaf audiences, well, they're kind of discriminated against in everyday life. They're not often accommodated for. So, surely you could maybe, if you're uncomfortable with subtitles, although I don't see why you would be, couldn't you give up this one accommodation, to make life easier?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated, ICO is one of those subjects that ICO has been banging on the door about for quite a long time now. And one of the things that we're doing with Screening Days program now is commissioning new captions for all the films that play in those strands, because it's often a challenge for independent distributors. One of the areas where actually larger studios are much more inclusive and care about, marginalized people a lot more than smaller groups, because almost always, like a big studio release, like a Marvel or, Disney, kind of like all those, like those sort of films always get released with the materials actually in place. So it's just a question of whether cinemas choose to offer them rather than them not being available. And so there's a lot of barriers, but one of the things that we always, like one of my kind of kind of provocations to an independent cinema, especially when they share a town with a multiplex who very rarely do subtitle cinemas. If you're gonna, why don't you put yourself apart and become the cinema that always shows films only with captions. I wonder, and I do wonder if people, you know, as much as you might be, there's a thin vocal minority of people who are, you know, like I know from speaking, doing audience surveying, there's a group of people who will always say it's very annoying to have captions on, but there's also a whole audience people who, you know, from, I think a lot of people during the pandemic have had the experience of saying to me, oh well, you know, like actually we have the captions on all the time because, you know, the way things are mixed, or I'm actually slightly, you know, like my partner's deaf, or, you know, like these sort of things actually comes up quite a lot. So yeah, it's something we're definitely pressing on. Well, I think actually we're both out of questions and over time, so I think that's a good point to wrap it up, Louise. But thank you so much. It's been really enlightening. And as I say, anyone who you know like to you know like wants to tell their friends about it, we'll have it on our YouTube channel very soon. But thank you so much for tonight's contribution.
No problem. So it'll probably be the only time I ever get to use my PhD research. So I'm glad to have the opportunity.
No. So we want it. Clearly, there's a wider interest, and we hope you get a bigger platform.
Definitely. Thank you again for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, cheers, Louise. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.